Thank you, Brad. It's an honor for me to be here. And as Brad had mentioned, in 1972, my father rented a 600 square foot space. In the back 300 square feet, he put the manufacturing operation that he had started a couple years earlier, manufacturing mini frames. And in the front 300 square foot space, his background was retail. He came out of the retail industry and general merchandise company. And in the front 300 square foot space, he opened up a small arts and crafts store, and he called it Hobby Lobby. That was the beginning. It was really 3 years later before he left his full-time position. My mom worked for free during that time. And by the way, me and my brother, while he was making mini frames, he would bring home stacks of the molding, the sticks, and me and my brother would glue those together, and we earned 7 cents a frame to glue our frames. That's how we got our bubblegum money. And so Dad says he built a company on slave labor and child labor, and it worked. So in '75, he left the company that he had been working with in retail and had done very well to start on this struggling venture called Hobby Lobby, and basically has been growing it ever since. Today, as mentioned, we have over 650 stores. We're opening probably 65 stores this year. Last year we opened 68. So we continue to grow. We've kind of looked at the total U.S. and all the 48 contiguous states and determined that we can put about 1,200 stores in those 48 states, and so we're just a little over halfway there, and are working to open as many as we can, as quickly as we can, because that's where we're making our money, and the more that we can make and the larger our company is, the more that we can do for ministry projects that we're involved in. Our facilities are there in Oklahoma City. We have about 6 million square feet that we are in, and we're under construction or have just recently moved into another 3 million. So we're going from 6 million to 9 million square feet of office and warehouse space there in Oklahoma City, and we've bought adjoining land where we can continue to put in more stores. It took us 30 years for us to get to the first $1 billion in retail sales. And then it was 8 years later, we went from 1 billion to 2 billion. 3 years after that, we got to 3 billion. And this year, we anticipate hitting 4 billion, which is 3 years after that. So we continue to grow and expand in as rapidly as we can. So that's a quick run through from the 300 square foot space to a $4 billion company this year. And there's a lot of lessons that we can share and tell, but there's typically in a company there's defining moments, and I want to share with you at least one of those, and that was in 1985. Because of 1985, my father invited the family to come over to the house, his house at the time, in the spring of 1986. At that time, there were several involved in the business, there still is, but my mom was more active than she is today. My mom, my dad, my brother, my older brother, my younger sister, her husband, my wife, 2 cousins. We're all involved in the business back in 1985, and he invited all of us to come over because he wanted to talk to us and ask us those that had children, to get babysitters for them. So we all go over there, and we had dinner, and we sat down, and he basically told us he did not know how we would be able to survive. 1985 was a tough year in the oil patch in Oklahoma, and I don't know how it was here in Michigan, but there were businesses that were closing shop right and left, banks being taken over, and 85 was the one year in our history that we lost money. We lost $1 million that year, and that was significant for us at that time. And most of the business was done in the fourth quarter, so we were going through our dry season from January through September, where we did good just to maintain a profit. And with the loss of the previous year, it got to a point where my father really did not know how we would be able to survive. He had always been able to figure out how that he would be able to pay the bills. And any startup business, it's typically a struggle. And it was just making our payments was where we were at that time. And so with this loss, my dad got to a point where he could not see how that we could make it. And if you read his book, More Than a Hobby, that you can pick up in our stores, he talked about this year and how that 86 was a very tough year. He would avoid the office, avoid the phone specifically, because those calls weren't pleasant. And he spent a lot of time in prayer, a lot of time on his knees that year, crying out to God. And he got to the point where he said, God, I don't know how we can make it. If you want this company to survive, you're going to have to intervene. And obviously, we're still around, and God did intervene. There was a time where that each phone call was just one bad news call after another. But there's a point where things kind of turned around, and God intervened, and we are here. And it became a very real lesson for my father, who took the brunt of that pressure at that time. But it was a lesson for him as well as for the family that this really is not our business. This is God's business. We are only responsible for being the stewards of what He has entrusted to us. And that is foundational for our family in running this business. We have to understand that what we have has been entrusted to us, that it has been given to us by God, and it is our responsibility to operate our business according to the guidelines that He has given us in His Word. Now, as a family, we grew up in a Christian home. My father, grew up in a Christian home. My mother grew up in a Christian home. And so, as a family, we apply those principles, and my father always applied those in the business. But it became very real at that point that our responsibility is to steward what He's entrusted to us according to the guidelines He has given us in His Word. So if you go to the statement of purpose for our company, you can go to it on the website. The very first statement we have is that our purpose is to honor God in all that we do by operating our business according to biblical principles. That is what directs our business. And when you start with the fact that it is not yours, it is God's, you're steward of it, it kind of helps make a lot of decisions on what you do and what you don't do. And that's why even recently, the case that has been mentioned, to some degree it was a bit of a simple decision because it's not our business, it's God's. And God can do whatever He wants to with this business. If He chooses to close our doors, that's His choosing. So while at one point it was a tough decision, on another hand it was somewhat of an easy decision, and it also was a sense of peace that we had, knowing that whatever the outcome, we had no guarantee of a win, but no matter what the outcome, win or loss, we are in good hands. God is a big God. He has taken care of us. And no matter what His path is for our lives, we know that He can take care of us in the future. And so we've grown up with a love and a passion for God and His Word. And that's where that in November of 2009, just over 5 years ago, when we bought our first artifact with this idea of putting in a Bible museum, that it was a natural. It really wasn't our idea. Some others were wanting to know if we would help them, and we kind of said we would. And as our collection grew, we just felt the sense that we needed to make sure that it happened. So we kind of inherited the project of this Bible museum. And there's many other ministries and things that we could share about the heart and our passion. Much of it has been distributing God's Word in over 100 countries around the world through a couple of different ministries that we've been involved in. And so we have had this love and the passion because the principles of this book have served our family well, and they've served our business well, and we believe that they are something that we would want all people to consider. We can't force it upon anybody, but we can sit there and say, hey, it's worked well for us, you might want to consider this book. And so the Bible Museum idea came to us, and we started collecting, and as I mentioned, the collection grew fast, and the idea was for a Bible museum. There's really kind of 4 different initiatives that have developed from the collection. The museum is what got started, but at the time we did not know when we would be able to open a museum, and so we wanted to start telling the story. So we engaged a gentleman by the name of Kerry Summers, who happens to be here today as well, who's the president of our Museum of the Bible nonprofit. And we engaged him to help build out a traveling exhibit. So we opened up an exhibit in Oklahoma City in 2011 celebrating the 400th anniversary of the King James Version of the Bible, the most widely printed version of the Bible. And it is now in its 6th city. It's out in California. It's Santa Clarita. 400 items and about 40,000 square foot of space. And that exhibit opened up the door for us to do some international exhibits. So the first one was at the Vatican in 2012. Where we had an exhibit. They asked us to come back the next year. We said, give us a break. So we went back in 2014, had another exhibit there right out by St. Peter's Square. We also had an exhibit in Jerusalem. And then because of our 2012 exhibit, we had the Pope at the time in 2012 was Pope Benedict, and he made a trip to Cuba, you may recall, and while he was there, he was talking to the Cuban leadership of the Catholic Church and saying, well, maybe this exhibit that he opens his window and sees across the plaza, the big banners that we had advertising and inviting people to come see the exhibit. He says, maybe that exhibit would be able to come here to Cuba. We have this rule that if the Pope is plugging your exhibit, you need to check into it. So Kerry made a trip down to Cuba, not thinking it was going to, the chances were pretty slim that we'd be able to get an exhibit in Cuba. But doors started opening. And so in January of 2014, this last year, we opened an exhibit at the National Cathedral in Havana, Cuba, and we were there for 22 days, and we had over 30,000 people that came through the exhibit. The very opening night, there was a big celebration that was an orchestra. They did drama and dance and music where they told the Bible story from Genesis to Revelation through the arts. And what we were told later was that it was the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches coming together to put that exhibit on. Later, I'm sitting here thinking, you know what? This exhibit took the American government's approval, the Cuban government's approval, and it was the Catholics and the Protestants coming together because of a book. That is the power of this book. We have our differences. I grew up in a Protestant tradition, and I have differences with the Catholic tradition or the Jewish tradition. I grew up in a denominational church, and I don't attend that church anymore, and I have some differences with some of the teachings of that church. I attend another church in another denomination, and I don't necessarily agree with everything that denomination teaches. If you look far enough back, there's times when I disagree with myself from just not too long ago. We have our differences. As a matter of fact, I kind of enjoy having some discussions on those differences. But what we want to do is we want to set our differences aside for a moment and say, here's a book that has changed our world. Can we agree and say, we ought to get to know this book? Our goal for the Museum of the Bible is to invite all people to engage with this book. We ought to know this book. So the traveling exhibits, we've been, and there's several other opportunities that we're continuing to look at. That is one of the initiatives. The museum is one of them. And then we have research and education, which rounds out the 4 different initiatives that we have. Hundreds of scholars that we have that are engaged on studying some of our artifacts, and we're working on a curriculum that we would like to see in the public schools. And that really helped me understand certain lines that we can't cross. I can't cross certain lines because I don't want to take a curriculum into the schools that I wouldn't want another faith to bring their faith document in and try to proselytize my child if my child's in the public school. So what we want to do is we just want to say, here's the facts of this book. And we look at this book in 3 different ways. What is its history? What are the archaeological evidence, manuscript evidence for this book? Let's just take a look at the facts of the book. What is its impact? This book is unique in the fact that it speaks into every area of life. There's every controversial subject that this book deals with. As a matter of fact, I was thinking the other day, do you know why a controversial subject is controversial? Because of that book. Think about it. Why is whatever controversy you want to come up with, why is it controversial? Most likely because of that book. This book speaks into every area of life. It has impacted every area of life in ways that we fully don't appreciate. We have hospitals today predominantly because of this book. We have higher education today because of this book. We have our freedoms today because of this book. And we could go on and on and on. One of the ways we want to show people is to realize that this book has had an impact on their lives in ways that they probably don't understand to the degree it's impacted their lives. That's the goal of the Impact Floor. 3 floors of our museum, these 3 stories, the history, its impact, and thirdly is its narrative. There's a story from Genesis to Revelation of this book, and we think people ought to know it. Now, you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. We just think you ought to know the story. So those are the 3 ways that we look at it, and we want to take a curriculum that basically tells people here's its history, its impact, and its narrative. And we were looking at introducing it into a public school in Oklahoma. We were getting the threatening lawsuits from the usual suspects, and about that same time, we had a mayor in Israel that said, I want it in our schools. We said, that's not the way this normally works. Some retailer from Oklahoma doesn't write Bible curriculum for the Israeli public schools. It just not the way it works. So Carrie made another trip over to Israel. Mayor's serious. There's a company there in Israel that's helping us put this curriculum together, and he saw it in their offices. There's a saying that man plans and God laughs. We were excited because there were 200 kids that had signed up for an elective course here in the U.S., and God said, no, I want you to take it to my kids first. So this last school year, we had over 1,400 kids in Ramat Gan, Israel, that were taking the Bible course, predominantly the Old Testament, in their schools. We are not smart enough to figure this out. God is up to something, and we are excited about being a part of that journey, and it has been exciting. And I can only scratch the surface of all that we're doing. We've got an archaeological site in Israel that we're working on. We're sending kids to Israel. We've got some that are at Oxford right now, 40 that this week will end their 2-week session there doing some intense training. So a lot that we've got going on in the Bible Museum. But in all this that we're doing, I feel like I have to put things in perspective. And so I normally do that by telling Marie's story. Marie was a preacher's kid, raised up in a preacher's home, and she would go out and she would evangelize with her father. And one time when she was out evangelizing with her dad, and there was a gentleman by the name of Walter that came to the event, and out of curiosity looked in and said, what's going on here? Came in and ultimately was convicted, and he came forward and accepted Christ as his Lord and Savior. Marie and Walter eventually met and wound up marrying each other, and Walter felt called into the ministry, so he became a pastor himself. So Marie went from a preacher's kid to a preacher's wife. They had 6 children and pastored small churches, never had a church over 50 that they had pastored, and so with 6 children, you can imagine, there's not a lot of extra money to go around. They had very little. As a matter of fact, there was a time when one of the kids would invite friends over, and they would put empty Tupperware bowls in the refrigerator in case somebody opened the door. They didn't want their friends to realize there was nothing in the refrigerator. So they grew up without very much at all, but Marie always maintained this love and this passion for God. She had this passion to share the gospel with as many as she could. There was times when she would be, one of her kids would be bring her home, and she would ask to be dropped off, away from the home, because she wanted to knock on doors and invite people to church or share the love of God with them. That was just Marie's heart. They would raise money for mission efforts at their church. There'd be a mission drive, and she would crochet doilies to sell into the mission drive to raise funds for mission efforts. And there were times when if her doily didn't sell, she bought her own doily. It was common for people to bring groceries, to what was referred to as pounding, but they would bring groceries to the pastors. And Marie was very faithful. She would calculate what those groceries were worth, and she would pay tithes on those groceries to the church. That was just the heart and the passion that she had. Marie lived her life faithful to God and died, and this world never would have ever stood up and took notice of Marie. Never wrote a book, never was able to speak before a large crowd, never had large monies to give, but she lived her life faithful to her God. Her kids caught that passion. She had a line that she would often say to her kids, and that is, only one life soon will pass. Only what's done for Christ will last. And she said that often. And her kids caught her passion, and all of them went into the pastoral ministry. They either married a licensed minister or they became a licensed minister. All but one. And that one was my dad. Marie was my grandmother. If you ask Dad today, if he's been able to outgive Grandma, he'd say no. And you might say, well, that doesn't make sense. But when you look at Mark chapter 12, Jesus tells us where he was standing in the temple. He was watching the wealthy give of their wealth. And then the widow came and gave her 2 mites. He makes an interesting comment. He says, she gave more. Now that doesn't compute with us. And probably the leadership of the synagogue would have scratched their head. But it teaches us that God has a different measuring rod than we do. He's not impressed with big numbers. He doesn't need our big numbers. There's really one thing that God's interested in, and that's our heart. And I think it's a question we all have to ask is, does God have our heart? If you were to walk into the lobby of our offices, what you will see is a painting of my grandmother on the wall, because she's the hero in our family. Grandma passed away in 1975, the year my father left his business to start this fledgling company. Never saw what Dad was able to do. But it was on her dying bed that my aunt was there, and my grandma asked my aunt, says, "Do you see them?" My aunt says, "Do I see what, Grandma?" She said, "The angels, they're coming to get me." And so while this world would never have recognized Grandma, I believe heaven rolled out the red carpet and welcomed her home. I don't know what God may have in store for you and for your life. You may have the opportunity to touch the world like my dad has with what he's been able to do. He may call you to be like my grandmother and live a life faithful. And if you give him your whole heart, he rolls out the red carpet. His arms are open wide to receive us. And that would be my prayer for you. Thank you.